Well, Stephanie has a very long list of accomplishments. She is the manager for the water conservation for the Salt Lake Public Utilities. She wrote the current Salt Lake City Conservation Plan and is finishing the drought response plan, which I would assume you have finished at this point.
Not quite. It's a
Okay.
pretty, well, because it's there, it's very technical and there's a lot of engineering and we haven't quite finished the modeling. We have a drought plan in place right now that we're using, but the new drought plan is going to have much more engineered modeling. So there's still some stuff we're working on.
All right. So you've sat on statewide committees, including Governor Herbert's plan for water strategic planning process. You've also written that you have, through that planning process, you've translated different wordings, I assume, so that you can insert language that is more regional versus statewide, so that we can perhaps not have Lake Powell Pipeline and Bear River Dam included in this language, or we have the ability to change our decisions.
Yeah, what it was is they wanted to include those projects as inevitable and necessary, and we were able to alter the language that they were being considered, but that the evaluation of the necessity for them should be ongoing. And that was a big fight. That discussion there took several meetings and there was crying involved.
So now we have Governor Cox releasing a mandatory restriction on our drought situation. I don't know what these restrictions are, or if they are just some type of a public warning.
It's more of that. The only thing he's done is, I mean, I shouldn't say the only, he has called on state facilities to reduce their water use on their sites. Okay. Interestingly, he made a big, and I'm not criticizing him, I just find it amusing. It's like, we shouldn't water between 10 and 6, and we should make sure our water sprinklers aren't hitting sidewalks. It's like, that stuff you should already be doing. Like that's that's day-to-day best management practice. And in a drought, what we need to do is step up our act. So I found it sort of odd. We actually also pushed back when he called for people to rip out their lawns and put in gravel. A number of us sent letters to him about the potential negative impact environmentally of that. In this area, I mean, that may be a different story in St. George or Iron County area, but up here in our elevation area, that's not necessarily a good choice. And there are alternatives to that. And we don't know who he got that advice from.
Well, and I find it interesting that all of a sudden this warning just came out when it's now almost the end of May. Mm-hmm. People have been hitting Home Depot, planning and getting all their yard work and all this stuff happening, when we should have done this. He should have done this back in April, saying, let's do some drought tolerant planting. I know these are the things that people are getting ready to do. So I find that pretty disheartening, honestly.
Yeah, he did want to, I guess so. So I'm looking at the online right now. So there's a briefing. Oh, that's COVID. Executive order was issued May 13, declaring a state of emergency. And all the whereases, whereas. So he's calling on, so apparently there's a drought response committee. I didn't know. And mostly, so this is mostly the legal language to invoke a state of emergency, which allows them to access federal funding in case there's economic or other hardships related to that. The only thing I've seen him say directly about drought is him addressing water use in state facilities, and then his comment about people shouldn't, they should take out their lawns and put in gravel. And he got, I'm going to guess he got probably 15 emails from USU research scientists and folks like me saying, who gave you your advice? Because that was really dumb. I think I used slightly more polite language than that, but not much. I even called everyone I knew at the state and at state extension and county extension, asking him who gave him that advice. And nobody did, as far as we know. We don't know where he got his horticultural or landscape guidance or his watering guidance, because most of it was not correct.
Wow.
Which was a bummer.
Yeah.
It was a bummer.
Well, hopefully he will change his ways with
Well,
that
and
input.
yeah, and hopefully, you know, what I hope he does is listen to his experts. Ooh, just lost you guys for a sec. Hold
No,
on.
you're still on.
Okay. No, I was pulling at my PowerPoint and it took over the screen for a moment.
Oh.
What I would hope is that he would turn to his experts, you know, Kelly Cope up at USU, Joanna Anawata, who is an environmental behavioral scientist who focuses on environmental issues and particularly water. Joan DeGiorgio, who's on the board for the Metropolitan Water District, all these other experts who have really good insight on how best to move forward in terms of public messaging and recommendations relating to water shortages and drought. And yet he's not relying on any of them, as far as I can tell. So I don't know who he's getting his information from. It's unfortunate. And it ain't me.
Mm.
I don't know.
Well,
when I'm queen.
Yeah, let's get you started. And then we really want this to be a dialogue. Yes. So we're hoping that we can engage and talk about some tips that we can all use this summer and share, and then your resources of where we can go to find more information.
Absolutely. Please feel free to jump in. So remind me of the timeline. How much time do we have till 11?
Till 11:30.
11:30, okay.
Yeah.
So I've got some slides I want to share with you. Feel free to ask questions. If I know it's something I'm going to cover coming up, I'll ask you to hold that thought. But let this be a dialogue. I don't want to lecture, but I do want to share some information with you about the utility and some of the stuff we've got going. So if you all are ready, I'm happy to get going on that, because I'm done talking.
And I would just ask if everyone can mute themselves so that we don't have any dogs barking, and then if you have a question, unmute yourself and then you can ask Stephanie.
That would be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Okay. I'm gonna go from the beginning. Lately, we've been having some interesting connection issues. There we go. All righty. So, hi, Salt Lake City Water Conservation Manager. So Salt Lake City Public Utilities. Ooh, where did I? Okay. So I have some info. That's weird. I don't know where that slide came from. Anyway, so we provide water to 360,000 people through 90,000 connections. We supply water to Salt Lake City, Holiday, Mill Creek, Cottonwood Heights, and portions of South Salt Lake, North Salt Lake, and Murray. We also, which is one of the things that's a bit complex, because we deliver water outside of our geopolitical boundary. Salt Lake City specifically, though, Public Utilities is a retail water provider and not a wholesaler. So that distinguishes us from places like Jordan Valley or Central Utah, Washington County, Iron County, Weber Basin. Those are all wholesalers. They have taxing authority, and they don't have the same level of regulation, or they have a different level of regulation than we have. We are a retail water provider. We have no taxing authority. Our revenue comes from water sales and connection fees, and we are obligated to meet all standards as established by the federal government and state and county health providers, as well as ourselves, because we set pretty high standards. Another little unknown fact, so Salt Lake City is actually, it may be the oldest retail water provider west of the Missouri River. The utility itself has been in existence since the 1850s. And we were one of the first cities that was fully metered And we began metering in the 1920s and read meters monthly. So we were actually one of the first cities to be fully metered in the Western United States as well. We're also, another little factoid, we're the largest retail water provider in Utah. We're the most industrialized and commercialized. And additionally to that, in the 2010 census, they asked a question they had never asked before, and that was, where do you work? And normally they ask where you live and things like that, but they asked where you work because they wanted to understand better the needs of future infrastructure in terms of roadways. But it was really illuminating for a number of other reasons. And what we learned as a result of that survey question in the 2010 survey, census survey, was that, so in the census, they divide all the cities in the United States that participate in the survey, which is pretty much every city and town and township, into one of three class sizes in terms of the size of the city. Salt Lake City is in the class 2 size, so we're a middle-sized city. Of the middle-sized cities in the United States, we have the highest ratio of commuter population to standing population in the country. So of cities of our size, we have more commuters than anyone else. And our ratio is comparable to that of New York City and Los Angeles. So every single day that we have 360,000 people who live within our service area, at least before COVID, grew 150,000 people every day. So people would come in, 150,000 people come in, work, and then leave. And those are people who are using water and relying on our infrastructure, but don't have a financial stake, if you will. I used to imagine in the last drought, I was picturing this ad campaign with somebody sitting on tracks with a newspaper and a briefcase and maybe holding themselves and saying, welcome to Salt Lake City, but pee at home or something, or, I don't know. I was thinking of all these really funny little ads to do, but that didn't go well. I'm from Santa Cruz and Berkeley, so that explains a lot. Anyway, so any questions on this? Okay, I'm moving on. Most of our water comes from surface water, about 80 to 90%. The reason that number is not a fixed number is it depends on the time of year and the amount of flow we have. We get about 50 to 60% of that water directly from our own canyon streams. The other portion of that comes through the Provo River Project, which is the Central Utah Project, which is the project in Utah that was built to get access to the upper Colorado River Basin water. In fact, this is one of the justifications for the Lake Powell pipeline, is Washington County argues it should be part of the upper Colorado Basin water, but because of its geographical location, it doesn't have access. So their argument is they want to pull their share of the upper Colorado Basin water that's coming in through the CUP from Lake Powell, so that they would access their upper Colorado River from the lower basin. The reason why that's an issue is Lake Powell is technically in the lower basin, Colorado Basin, not the upper basin. So they need special permissions for that. Water follows money. The other component of our water supply currently is groundwater, wells. Now, again, this fluctuates and we mostly rely on these wells during the summer months. We don't tend to use them in the wintertime, so it gives them ample time to recharge. We're also examining technology that's referred to as aquifer recovery or aquifer recharge and recovery. And what that is in times of high water flow, you would create either open land areas or literally infusion areas where excess water could be infused into aquifer areas so that water could be extracted during periods of low water. It's not a technology without its challenges, and we're pretty built out, but we're looking at this opportunity in partnership with Sandy City and the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. Metro is our wholesaler, so we're not part of the Jordan River Water Conservancy or Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. Our water comes through from CUP and from Metro. So Metro is an agency that's part of the Central Utah Project, because cities are not allowed to be part of federal water projects. So we built Metro to be our agent to act with the CUP. So we get our Provo River water through the Metro program or Metro project. Right now, I'll tell you about our water supply. coming up. So this map is about a month old, and it's a lot more red now. So most of the state is in an exceptional or extreme drought. One of the complexities of this also, so our reservoir storage is also below average. So it's about, across the state, it's around 50 to 60%, depending on the reservoir and the basin. Stream flow was at about 60% for most of the state. And on top of that, besides having a low snowpack this year, because last year, so 2020 was the driest year on record for Utah. One of the outcomes of that was exceptionally dry soils. So in the Wasatch Mountains and the Uintas and the other basins where we collect snow that is then in runoff, is captured in one of our reservoirs. Because the soil was so dry, a lot of that water is not making it to our streams and our reservoirs. So on top of having a low snowpack, we have very, very dry soil. So our stream runoff is very low. And in some cases that impedes us from extracting water because we're still obligated, and rightfully so, to meet fish flow level, to maintain certain levels for fish in some of these streamways. So there's, across the state, there's an issue with access with stream flow because of exceptionally dry soils. Climate models in terms of climate change models are a little tough for us in that Utah literally sits on the cusp of the different models. So we're right at the borders of where these models are indicating change. So it's hard to know what's going to happen right where we are. Based on models, we could either have the same volume of precipitation, but it comes in the form of rain, or we would have less precipitation in total. So we're working with a couple of different universities to refine those models and identify indicators that help us improve our ability to forecast what our future water supply will be. And one of the outcomes of these studies has been an identification that the La Nina weather pattern, which is a weather pattern that sits off the Atlantic, is very critical to our precip patterns here in Utah. And that when the temperatures in the northern quadrant of the Atlantic Ocean warm, not by very much, that exacerbates the La Nina pattern and drives down our precipitation where we are. And we've been sitting under there's been a La Nina weather pattern over the Atlantic for a number of years now. So we're working on improving that. So climate change and climate change analysis and working to build in resiliency are critical components of long-range planning for the utility. So we believe in science. Right on. So this is just a snapshot. This is something that's posted. We have a number of different references we use. So we look at information from NIDIS, which is the National indices for drought, and they post data every week that we look to in terms of projection of precipitation or soil temperatures or ambient air temperatures. We also have this this chart is developed by the state and is on a dashboard, and I think it's actually available to the public as well. Then it just tells us our reservoir levels in various reservoirs. And right now they should all be full, and they're not. Now the Central Utah Project says they're meeting the full allocations of their member agencies. And the Central Utah Project, the Provo River system, includes Jordanelle, Strawberry, and Deer Creek. So we're expected to get our full allocation from those, but we don't know what the situation will be next year. In terms of forecasts, so this was the NIDIS and NOAA's forecast for a 3-month outlook through June. And it's indicating that temperatures these 3 months will be higher than average and precipitation will be lower than average, which is not a great outlook. On the plus side, we've been a little cooler than we've expected, which has helped retain what little rainfall we have in our soils longer and help delays for some folks to delay watering. Any question on the water supply scenario right now? Okay, I'm going to move on. So we do have a water shortage contingency plan. It was established in 2004, or that was when it was adopted. So it's a little out of date. But it does establish legal authority through the ordinance. So the ordinance compels the utility to have and maintain a water shortage contingency plan. It identifies specific triggers and the criteria for moving from one trigger to another. It allows us to issue warnings and fines, and creates a process for that. And then it also provides the plan itself has what we call a response summary, which, well, I can show you what that looks like in just a sec. So we do have a plan. Now we are updating it right now, and I'll share with you in a little bit what those updates include. Just as a by the way, when we wrote this in 2004, most water shortage plans or drought plans focused almost entirely on supply. Our plan looked at both supply and demand. And that allows us to create a direct partnership with our community, because we can message to them, yes, our supply is down, but if we keep our water use below that level, we don't have to have restrictions. So it helps with messaging. It makes the community a direct partner in our ability to sustain and weather a drought. And it's a more realistic perspective on how to identify a drought stage. That will be something that will remain with the existing drought plan. One of the shortages is we don't have a strong linkage between actual behavior and water use reduction, which is something we're working on right now with the update. So the existing plan has 5 stages: advisory, mild, moderate, severe, and critical. Now, currently we're in advisory stage. I understand that this might be changing soon, though I'm not in a position to say for certain one way or another. That sounds so mysterious. But right now, it's advisory is just, increasing communication and messaging around water shortages. One of the things our stage does, and it's a shortcoming of our planning, is that the restrictions don't start until the first restrictions are in place, and they're not really restrictions. Stage 2, we require municipal and other governmental facilities to remain within tier 2, which is remain within their irrigation budgets. It's not clear what would happen if they don't. However, in the moderate stage, we require those same municipal and institutional properties to reduce their water use, some volume of water between 15 and 24% to be determined by the utility. Those are the first stage at which we institute restrictions. We don't institute restrictions on the community until stage 4. Now, there are some problems with this. And one of the reasons it was done this way was back in 2004, when we were writing this, there was a sense from political and utility leadership that voluntary actions have always been adequate in the past in addressing water issues, and that the desire was to rely on voluntary measures. And there was a real resistance to allow for any kind of restriction or even any kind of penalty or enforcement. So I'm an analyst and a technician. I'm an analyst. I'm not. So, I can give them the information, and in the end, people with a higher pay grade than me make decisions. And I hope that my information is compelling. But that's the best I can do. We are now looking at revising that. And I can share a bit more of that with you. But one of the things we're looking at, well, I'll talk about that in a moment. But this is where we are right now. This is an example. So the response summary is a document that's designed to actually be able to be posted in public places if we need to. And what it does, and this is a still shot of it, so you can't see it, scroll through, but it identifies each stage. We've divided our service area roughly into residential type properties, commercial type properties, with some breakdown in things like hospitals, restaurants, hotels, and then municipal and institutional properties. And so for each of our stages, those classifications and subclassifications are sort of identified on their own, and then we identify a response action during that stage, and whether that response action is voluntary, strongly encouraged, or mandated. So this document was created to make it easier to convey messages to the community. And it is not in the ordinance itself, because we want to be able to modify it without having to go through an approval, the same kind of approval process. But when we update, as we're updating the new water shortage plan, we will be updating this response summary. For instance, one of the things we'll do is we'll start restrictions much sooner on municipal properties, but our approach will be, rather than saying you have to reduce 15% across all properties, it will be, we're working right now with parks, golf, and city facilities to, one is identify all of the properties they're responsible for, and then analyze the characteristic of those properties in terms of level of use, the type of use, the age and characteristic of the irrigation system. And then the last category, I think, is community input. But the idea would be, and also, so we're not, what we'll do then is rank all the properties in terms of priority. So say Liberty Park and Pioneer Park might be high priority sites, but Ensign Peak Park or the medians on 600, 700, and 800 East would be low priority properties. And that way, then the first thing we would do is have restrictions on watering on low priority properties so that we can start restrictions sooner, increase our reduction earlier in our drought plan action, and also model to the community appropriate behavior sooner. And this way, it's not as, it's tough to cut back on a site 15% potentially, because we have a lot of our urban forest in our public spaces. A lot of them have heavy use, and that use affects the volume, the volume of water that a lawn needs. So we're looking at trying to make it so that we can start those reductions earlier on, but on sites that would have less impact if they weren't watered. The other thing is we're looking at sites not only as a single site, but if there's areas within a site that could be lower priority. For instance, at Liberty Park, the lawn that's around the perimeter of the park versus where, so you have the lawn that's abuts all the streetways, then you have the pedestrian path, then the running path, then the pedestrian path, then the roadway, and then the bulk of the park. Well, could we reduce the water use on the outside lawn perimeter earlier than we reduce the water use on the interior part of the park? Because people don't really play or use that outside area to the same level they use the inside area. So the idea is to create opportunities to reduce water use without having a negative impact on both the user experience, but also on our urban forest and other factors, but that we can start measuring and accruing water reductions earlier in the initiation of our plan. So that all that is in process, which is one reason why we're not done with our plan yet, because this was something that sort of just, because of my engagement with an organization, the Alliance for Water Efficiency, which is a national organization, in a dialogue I was having with them on a committee about something else, this notion, again, getting away from the idea that things have to be all or nothing. Like, is there a way to stage things and stagger them so that we can have earlier impact? So we're reworking how we're approaching restrictions and reductions on these municipal sites. The next step will be working with the county, state, and federal facilities within our service area, which is a little bit harder, but it's not going to be impossible. So we'll do the same kind of thing with those properties as well. Any questions on either the stages or the response summary? Okie doke, I'm moving on. Oh, yes.
Oh, I was just wondering if are there any cities that, or other utilities that you are working with who have experienced more drought, so they're a little further along in their thinking, or like I'm thinking Arizona or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
Or are we kind of inventing the wheel here, or what's happening?
That's a great question. And I'm going to assume your name is Nancy, because that's what your thing says. Hi, it's nice to meet you. We do, part of my involvement, so I'm involved in two national organizations. One is the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and the other one is the Drought Learning Partnership. And from both of those groups, there's a lot of dialogue. I have a lot of colleagues. I don't have many colleagues actually inside Utah. There's not very many water conservation managers. So most of my colleagues and I've been in this job since 2001. Most of my colleagues are, I think of as out of state or at Utah State University. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of dialogue. The difference is, there's always some differences. Like people go, why do we allow grass? Well, because we sit at 5,000, 5,400 square feet elevation, and there's grasses that would grow here that don't need much water. So it's not like we have to prohibit it. What we need to do is change the mindset about what kind of grass we plant. A lot of the plants that would grow really well in St. George and such that they could be using, we can't use here because we're high enough in elevation that we're a cold climate. So a lot of your wonderful Las Vegas and Arizona plants wouldn't grow here. But in terms of concepts and policies and priorities, that's where we learned all this. For instance, my insight to include demand as part of our trigger along with supply came from those dialogues 20 years ago. Because in talking with my colleagues in other cities, because at the time that's all I had, there was no one else in Utah. Denver, Arizona, Phoenix, and Southern Nevada Water, they recognized a shortcoming was when they had a restriction based on supply, people reduced initially a whole lot, but they still had to have those restrictions in play because they were driven simply by supply. And so even though people are doing a great job and they could have eased up a little bit on some of their mandates, like new landscaping or something, they couldn't legally. So the decision to include demand as a component of a trigger, as a criteria, came from those dialogues. The fact that we've never had a time of day ordinance comes from those dialogues. So for instance, even as our conservation measure, we've never mandated that you can't water during the day. And that's in part because one, a lot of our service area gets canyon winds in the evening. And if they water at night, a lot of that water would blow off. And there was actually an interesting study that USU did recently on this very topic. The other part of it is the critical issue with how you water isn't the time of day, but that you cycle soak. And so if you're watering for half an hour at midnight, I don't care, you're still wasting water. So that doesn't help me. So driving sending all the energy and messaging and spending resources to enforce an ordinance that doesn't actually save water doesn't help me. And the reason we know it is expensive and it doesn't help is because Denver spends $500,000 a year enforcing their time of day ordinance. And we don't have $500,000 to spend on that. So my relationship with all those folks and these other communities, California as well, absolutely that influences the planning and programming because we share. In fact, yesterday there was a webinar on drought planning and I was the bad example because so much of what is recommended to do now based on study, we haven't done yet. But the wonderful thing is because of the study that AWE did on, they did a study recently on the impacts of restrictions and enforcement on meeting drought reduction requirements. And the data is overwhelmingly positive about restrictions and enforcement. And literally they have numbers on this. When the community did and didn't, the study is extensive. It included like 12 different water providers, some of them wholesalers. So really large areas were included in this study. Now, because of that study, I've been able to share that with my bosses and say, look, now we have good evidence that, and not only the value of restrictions during the drought, but what they're finding is there's less rebound after the drought, going up to pre-drought water use levels, which is really important. So being able to having these connections in these other regions, having access to this research and data helps and it informs our programs all the time. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a follow-up question to that. So are the other utility districts in our area or in the state listening to what you're doing and following suit, or what's happening there?
I don't know. There's an organization called the Utah Water Conservation Forum, and I used to be a member of that. And I admit I walked away from that group for a few years because it felt like it was mostly the voice of the wholesalers, and their concerns and issues are different than mine. And sometimes you just need to take a break. And so I stepped away, and I'm actually rejoining them this year. We'll see how it goes. I can be a little mouthy, I admit. And so one of the issues for wholesalers versus us, for instance, Jordan Valley, a great example, they have contracts with their member cities to buy water. Well, those member cities may want to be saying to their customers, oh, restrict your water use. But the contract those member cities have with Jordan Valley is for a volume of water that's fixed, regardless of how much of that water they actually sell. So if those member cities don't sell all that water, they still have to pay for it.
Oh.
So one is I find it ironic that Jordan Valley talks and lectures about tiered pricing structures when they don't have one themselves for their member cities. So sometimes it's, but we try, and I'm trying to be a better partner. I'm really trying hard. The governor's water strategic planning process was a positive thing, but I was the only city invited to the process. I was the only representative of a city water provider at the table. They were all the wholesalers were there. So Jordan Valley, Weber Basin, Washington County, Iron County, Jordan Valley, CUP, they were all at the table. And then me and a bunch of academics who fortunately were also mouthy. So that's how we were able to get done what we needed to with that.
Yeah.
So we do partner to some extent. But our wholesaler, who's Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy, only has 2 customers, and that's Salt Lake City and Sandy City. And so they stay out of the conservation thing because they trust us to do what we need to do, and they support us. For instance, Metropolitan Water District pays for the water check program, which is $100 and some odd thousand potentially every year. And they pay for the entire program. So that takes that gives me my budget back, because I used to pay for that program. So them taking that program on for us means it freed up my money for other things. So we do work more closely with Sandy City because we have a similar water supply. And we work a lot with Candace Scheibel in Iron County because she runs some of the state extension programming, and we do webinars with them. So there is some collaboration, probably more with the extension offices than with other water providers. And also part of it is that our water supplies are all disaggregated. We don't have a single source in Utah. Our source is different than Jordan Valley. I mean, they get water from the CUP also, but they also have their own water supply, and they have groundwater sources we don't have. We own a lot of our water. One reason our pricing structure is as it is, and the prices are set as they are, is because literally we're, in some cases, hundreds of feet from our source, and we own it. So unlike Arizona or parts of Southern California that are piping water in across hundreds and hundreds of miles of conduits and causeways, we are literally next to our very protected supply. So yeah, we do some partnership, and I don't know how much they listen. Although I think some of that's starting to change. When I get to the conservation information, the state and the CUP are partnering with me on 2 projects coming up, and they're putting money at the table. So I'm pretty darned excited, and I'm going to guess when that project starts, then other utilities might start listening more.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's very informational. I have one other question, and
Yeah.
you can answer it at any time because it doesn't necessarily fit here. But I'm wondering about groundwater and whether statewide we're becoming in deficit greatly, or if it's recharging or what's happening. So whenever that's appropriate.
Yeah. It might make sense now because we've already talked about water sources. In our area, for the most part, we are effectively recharging our well space, and we are not, our measured capacity is good. In some areas, especially southern Utah, that's not the case. And some of those aquifers are in danger of being depleted. I mean, that was one of the reasons of the big battle about Snake River or the Snake Valley that Steve gave a couple weeks ago. But the complexity there is, well, it's not like they're trying to keep the water in the aquifer, they're just trying to get it used somewhere else. But where we sit along the Wasatch Front, which I'm most able to speak to, at this time, our well supply is good. And we have rights for a few more wells. So I know we're going to be expanding our well capacity within our recharge zone. We also have a aquifer, a groundwater what's it called? Groundwater recharge overlay zone that is protected by ordinance, so that we have a city code allows us to protect and work to protect both source water and soil conditions within a recharge recovery zone. It's a shallow aquifer area, so it's not a statutory authority, but it invites us to the table whenever development occurs within the recharge area, and it strengthens our stormwater enforcement rules within the recharge area. So we have greater legal authority in terms of contamination. So we do have things in place that help us protect our recharge zones, not just our watersheds.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So this is not important. This is just, we have all kinds of messaging about conservation during the drought and after, and I'm just going to go past that. So I wanted to give some information about the conservation plan, because we've talked already about the drought plan. We recently completed this update, and one reason the drought plan wasn't done is we started that project we got a grant through the Bureau of Reclamation to update our water shortage contingency plan, which is what we call the drought plan. But in the middle of that process, the utility determined it was time to update what's called the water supply master plan and the major conveyance study. And those are really critical documents that forecast. They have a 40-year planning window or horizon that look at future and current water supplies, capital needs for sustaining and supporting that future water supply, as well as capacity within our system in terms of infrastructure. So they did that study, which was really helpful in informing both the drought plan and the conservation plan. So we shelved the drought plan so that those two studies could be completed: the supply and demand study, and then the storage and capacity study. So they helped inform, the completion of those plans now help inform the updated drought plan. We also were able to complete the conservation master plan in the middle of that, which was also helpful. So this plan was also informed by the water supply master plan and the conveyance and storage plans. So this is the fourth conservation plan I've written for the utility. It is the most technical and engineered plan to date. In fact, the state really had to work hard to find any criticism of it whatsoever. And the one area of criticism they had, I pushed back hard. Again, a little sometimes mouthy, I'm sorry. So one of the things we look at, we actually did a survey online. We did some open house because of COVID. We would normally take the plan out to the community. We did all that online, and we did a open house through Facebook. And the only negative criticisms we got on our plan was that we didn't address agricultural water, but it's a municipal water supply plan, and we don't have agricultural water. There was criticism that we didn't address that our goals weren't strict enough. And this is an engineered study, and it's based on existing data. And of course, and there's language in here that states it, that as new data comes in, say new information about climate change impacts or any other issue or changes in our anticipated growth and density, then of course those goals will be changed. And this plan is legally required to be updated every 5 years. So we know we'll be looking at them. And this plan, honestly, this is my job description. So I don't know if anyone else reads it, and part of me doesn't care, because I read it all the time, and everything I do comes out of this plan. And when I go to the utility leaders or city leadership, everything I do, I preface as stated in the adopted, 2020 water conservation plan, we're doing this program. So this is my justification. This is how I get my budget. This is what I do. If it doesn't fit in this plan, I have to give something serious thought. There has to be a way for it to fit into this plan for it to work, because this is based on engineering and science. So what we know from our water supply master plan is that one is a 40-year planning horizon. We also plan, besides that volume of water we need for demand, we also like to plan for 15,000 acre feet of water that's held in reserve, which helps us through times of drought, also fighting fires and other things like that. But it gives us that wiggle room. And that's the water we store in Mountain Dell and Little Dell reservoirs, which are not part of the CUP process or project. Those are reservoirs that we own. One of the things we identified, in fact, as part of the drought plan as a mitigation measure, is that we're looking at ways to increase our stored water capacity. So once water leaves a treatment facility, how much of that water can we store offsite, also to increase our storage capacity. The other thing is we identified is if we, at our current conservation level, based on our water supply planning horizon, we need to reduce an additional 16,080 acre feet a year to be able to live within our future water supply, which is interesting because that's actually, we've saved about 16,000 acre feet a year as an average since our program began. So we have to double our efforts. We also looked at historical use, so there was a lot of analysis. This is where things get a little fuzzier. It's easy. We have a lot of historical billing data. Like I said, we've been metering since the 1920s. But one of the problems is our billing system was developed, it's computerized, but it was developed before there were software platforms and packages you could buy. So it's been constructed in-house. It's a little quirky, and there's literally just 3 people in the entire city who know how to operate it and are allowed to touch it. So it's a little temperamental, and historically information has gone into the billing system, and it's called PUBs, which is for public utility billing systems, based on the information that customer service folk need to know to be able to, or meter readers, so that meters can be read, data can be delivered to the billing information people to verify information, and then it goes to customer service or computers to bill. It hasn't necessarily been designed for analysis. So we're trying to add more fields in it so we can disaggregate data. So we have a number of classifications, which are user groups. So we know, for instance, we can identify single family residences, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, apartment buildings. We can identify hotels, restaurants, hospitals, and then institutions. So municipal properties, county properties, school properties, some church properties, state properties, and federal properties. The problem with the billing system is it's self-identifying. So if a customer comes in and says, I'm with, say, the State Department of something, and they open up a connection for a new facility, it might go in by that. However, if they're using an accounting firm to pay their water bill, then the bill might be listed under the accounting firm instead of under the property owner. So our what's called CII, commercial, industrial, institutional billing data, the data per meter is very accurate. What we don't know exactly is who actually is the customer on the end use. So we've developed, as part of our conservation program, we have a commercial industrial analytics program ongoing right now, where we're disaggregating all of our commercial customers, which is about 12,000 to 14,000 customer data points that we're trying to more specifically identify the types. So the goal at the end of that project, we'll know actually where the who's a car wash, who's a tattoo parlor, who's a beauty salon, where are all the restaurants, is this actually a hotel, is this actually a church site? So we're working on disaggregating. So historical use, though, we've divided it by the existing subclassifications we have. In that area, I would say that data is squishy in terms of the assumptions. Our residential data is clearer. I told you I was an analyst and a geek, so there you go. So in terms of, so that's our historical use. Basically, we've reduced water use since the beginning of our program about 27.7% overall. We've reduced peak day demand by 31%. This is important. So when people say, yeah, but we use less water and then you raise our rates anyway, I raise your rates pennies and not dollars. And the reason is because of conservation directly. So peak day demand is that day of the year that has the highest volume of water demand. It usually happens the end of July, early part of August. Actually, it's starting to happen earlier now. It's one day, but on that day, we have to be able to deliver all that water, to have the capacity to deliver all that water and fight fires. Because if we can't do that, it affects the city's bond rating, which then affects everyone else's bond ratings and insurance ratings. So your ability to pay for your homeowner's insurance is affected by the city's bond rating, which is directly affected by our ability to fight fires within the municipal service area. So being able to meet capacity on that peak day is really, really important. So we build all of our infrastructure. So pipes that go into the ground, lift station, pump stations, well houses, everything gets built to meet that capacity on that one day of the year. That's the only time we have to meet that. We fill that capacity. When we can consistently reduce that capacity, even as the city grows, that capacity then lasts longer, so we don't have to upsize it. And so for instance, with all the densification that's happening downtown, there was a new water line that was going to go in along 900 South. And when they put that new water line in, they didn't have to increase the size or the capacity of that line. That project alone saved $20 million, 20 million. So conservation saved 20 million with one project because we extended the life of the existing infrastructure. And so conservation can save big money. So though we may have to raise rates, if we had to raise the rates to cover that 20 million expenditure, your rates would go up a whole lot higher. So conservation pays for itself. As a community, we've saved about average over the course of the lifetime of our conservation programming, 16,000 acre feet of water a year. But now we have to double that. Yay, job security. So summary of our goals is also part of our plan. So this chart shows you the blue bar is where we are currently, the green bar, and that's indoor use. The green blob is outdoor use. The dotted dash above that was historical outdoor use. The solid bar is our goal. So you can see we need to reduce water use both indoors and outdoors, which is why we have the 7-gallon challenge right now. And this is, mind you, conservation goals. This isn't even our drought goals. So anything we have to do in terms of the drought is on top of this. Though if we can meet our conservation goals, that would give us a lot of resiliency in the next water shortage because we would have less demand. We've also, by the way, broken that down. Here's this slide, not only as a whole, but by subclassification. So for instance, though it might be easy for a household to reduce 15% because all they have to do is water their lawn less, it might be hard for a restaurant to do that because it might mean they have to shutter their doors. So businesses don't have the same flexibility necessarily in the same way that households do. So when we've looked at our conservation goals, we've looked at them both for indoor reductions and outdoor reductions and across classifications. This analysis was based on the analysis of historical water use by each of these subclassifications, so the burden they place on water demand within our system, which is why it's so important that we improve our analytics around commercial and industrial customers. Then in addition to this, we've established 5, 10, and 40-year goal marks for each of these subclassifications. Over the next 5 years, the intent will be, so these are some of our subclassifications right across the top here. So it will be the intent to, one is clarify all the billing data to make sure that these are actually the kinds of businesses we think they are, but also to break these subclassifications down even farther. So for instance, we might break restaurants down into the number of table sizes. We could break apartments down into the number of units they have, because obviously the reduction needs here, if it's a 8-unit apartment, they're not going to be able to say, though it's based on a percentage, there's still some economy of scale when it comes to reduction for commercial properties. So we want to make sure that we have meaningful goals for them, and goals that really help us, but goals that don't have a negative impact to the economy. Although the other part of this analytics, it will help us identify the kinds of businesses we want in our service area or industries, and identify the highest water use industries, and maybe make decisions on a policy level outside of my pay grade that drive what kinds of businesses we bring into our service area. Any questions on this? Now, I don't expect you to read this chart right now, and it is in the conservation plan, which is online. And so I turn to this chart a lot. And like I said, we've broken it down into 5, 10, and 40-year goals. And that's how I'm doing program selection right now to achieve these goals.
So Stephanie, there are some questions in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
Sally asks, what is cycle soak?
Oh, okay. Cycle soak is so when you water your lawn, we have, or anything else for that matter, typically, if you think about, imagine a really dry sponge that you're putting under a faucet. Well, if the water's on really hard, the water kind of bounces off and you get water everywhere and on your shirt and stuff. And that's because of the air in the little holes or the capillaries of that sponge keep water from entering in. So to get that sponge wet, you have to put the water on more slowly to give water time to move into, to break the surface tension, change the pressure in the sponge so water can move through it and push the oxygen out. Soil works the same way. So if you have, especially like with the clay soil, which is most of our area, if you have a clay soil and you turn your sprinklers on and they run for 30 minutes, literally after 8 minutes, water stops absorbing into your soil, because the clay soil at the surface has reached capacity and water just flows off. Also, if water goes on really fast, water just bounces off and flows off. So cycle soak is a methodology of watering where instead of running, let's say you're running your sprinklers for 20 minutes, instead of running them for 20 minutes straight, you have your cycle come in, you have a zone come on, an irrigation zone for 8 minutes or 6 minutes. It runs, turns off, the next zone comes on, runs for 6 minutes or 8 minutes, turns off, the next zone comes on and runs for that same amount of time until you work through all those cycles, and then the cycle begins again, ideally about an hour later. And what that does is it helps the water break the surface tension of the soil so that the water can start moving down through the soil profile and you have less runoff. That process is called cycle soak. Now, drip systems, you don't need to cycle soak. So this is really about systems that are spray heads. So whether it's a spray head into a lawn or a spray head into a shrub border, having the system turn on and off during the course of its watering cycle will increase the penetration of water into the soil, which is the whole point. So ideally then, or theoretically, and actually proven scientifically, research field, when you cycle soak, you can actually shorten your run times because more water is actually getting into the soil. So we recommend, as part of in our education and campaign literature, that people cycle soak, which is more critical. So for instance, back in 2001, when I started and we were the state was in a drought and the governor was pushing us to adopt statewide things, and they wanted to adopt a statewide rule on watering at midnight. I had to explain all of this, and I had to dry board up at the state capitol with the Water Resource Committee and another legislative committee drawing the pictures of soil. And the issue is if someone thinks that all they have to do to save water is move from watering, say, at 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning, they're not going to save a drop of water. Because if you water at night, you don't have the water loss from evaporation. If you're watering straight through, you still have runoff. That doesn't change. The runoff penetration of the soil doesn't improve because it's nighttime. So if the focus is on daytime watering, but not any messaging about cycle soak, you don't actually achieve any water savings. And that's why we didn't focus on that message, because it's not the most important message. And if we're going to spend time messaging and educating and enforcing, it has to be on something meaningful that actually gets us the water savings we need. So that's what cycle soak is.
The other questions from Ann Ziegler: if 80% of our water goes to agriculture, why are we allowing so much water to growing alfalfa that we send to China?
So again, our conservation planning and drought planning is focused on our retail service area. That's a state issue. So Salt Lake City and our water supply, we don't provide agricultural water. And I don't know the answer to that. Now, the agricultural interests were highly represented at the governor's strategic planning process. Agriculture, that issue was brought up. There's a hesitancy on the part of both municipalities and state leaders to push too hard on ag, and I'm not sure why. I mean, I think of all the other crops they could be growing. They could be growing teff, they could be growing hemp, quinoa, so many other things that would provide food and have a much lower water and fertilizer input, and we would actually use them here. So I can't speak to that. I know they're looking at ways to protect. One of the resistance, I think, is that based on my involvement with the state planning process, was that the agricultural sector is worried that should they reduce their water usage, they will lose access to that water forever. Mm-hmm. So one of the things they're looking at, which is something they've done successfully in parts of Idaho, and sorry, that's my other phone, and I can't shut it off. Parts of Idaho and in Colorado is water banking. So what this would allow a farmer to do, for instance, is let's say they want to, they do 3 seasons of wheat within a single growing season. They could do 2 of their seasons, not do a 3rd season, and allow that water to return into the water basin, but they wouldn't lose that. So then other, like municipalities, other farmers, or someone else could rely on that water, or you could use it for stream flow. So there's mechanisms that exist in other states that have been successful in helping farmers reduce their water footprint while still protecting the integrity of their water right. I know they're examining those here in Utah. I don't know how successful that process is, because I'm now not at that table. There's a group called, there's the Natural Resources Committee of the state legislature and a Water Resource Committee. And I believe we're at the table for the Water Resource Committee. But again, municipalities, it's hard for them to speak up when it comes to ag water because it's not our expertise, and there might be some political quid pro quo going on. I don't know. Yeah. So that's not something I can fully answer. I'm accountable for the water we have within our service area. And I try to, because I can get myself into so much trouble otherwise, I try to focus on what I'm doing here.
So Gaylynn's asked a question about gray water. So do other states have programs? And how does Salt Lake City water rate compare to other large cities in the West?
Okay, so 3 questions. So gray water, or 2 questions, gray water and water rates. So gray water is, okay, so for those of you who don't know different kinds of water, there's culinary water, which is water that goes through a water treatment process such that it's drinkable or potable. There is what we call secondary water, which is water that flows through irrigation ditches or canals that is not treated and might be used for above ground irrigation. There is gray water, that's water that's used in your home or at a facility, is not treated at all, and then is used for some other function on that same property. And then there is what's called black water or effluent, which is water that goes through that's used at a tap, goes through a sewer system, goes to a reclamation facility, and that water is then treated to be discharged. The issue with gray water, so right now the state has a code that allows for gray water, but it is, the code states that it's up to the county health divisions or departments to establish policies and procedures relating to gray water. In the absence of such procedures, it is not allowed within that county. Salt Lake County has not addressed gray water, so it's not technically legal. And I admit, part of that is my push. And the reason is, again, this is, so you may think that as the water conservation manager, my goal is to help my community reduce water. And that's my second goal. Actually, my first goal is to do that and not screw things up with unaccounted for or unintended consequences. So my real first goal is to protect the environment while not the environment, okay? So the problem with gray water, cool idea. The initial studies were all done back east, Rodale and Cornell Institute, which are fabulous. So Cornell University, Rodale Institute, amazing. I'm always looking to them for great information, wonderful, fabulous resources. But they did the initial studies on gray water. Their findings were that gray water has minimal negative impact to the environment and to public health. Well, think about it. So Rodell and Cornell are both back east. Back east, you have soils that are high in their acidic soils. They're high in microbial content. They have a lot of organic material. You have a great deal of rainfall. It happens year long. That rain in some places is slightly acidic. And you have, so you have very different physical conditions. Let's take all of that out here now. So now you're sitting in Utah. You have almost no microbial activity in your soil whatsoever. You have little or no organic material. You have almost no rainfall during the months that gray water would be used out of doors. You have alkaline soils, so you have high soluble salts in our soils. And you have, so you have none of the conditions that occur back east. So what happens with gray water is not treated. So there's lots of little particulates in it. And some of those particulates are bacteria, and there's little pathogens, and there's little solids and floaty things. And that lands on your landscape. But all the activity that happens in an environment, so microbial activity, organic material, rainfall, all of that helps to break down that, and acidic soil helps to break down those little particulates and pathogens and bacteria. None of that exists here, none of it. So what you end up with in soils is increased levels of soluble salts, potentially long-lasting colonies of bacteria and pathogens, and potentially negative impacts to soil health and public health. So there are communities in California that were experiencing horrific droughts in the 70s, and they enacted ordinances that allowed for the use of gray water. One of them was around Davis County, which is a really great agricultural institution itself. Those ordinances have been rescinded because of long-term negative impacts of gray water on soil health, because they had alkaline soils with low microbial counts and low organic. So basically the stuff in gray water didn't get broken down in time. Also, gray water would be a system. You can buy home systems now, and especially when the drought in California hit this last time, a lot of companies popped up with home systems for gray water. You have to maintain those. And if you don't maintain them, then they don't work anymore. So the issue in Arizona, Phoenix probably has one of the most specific gray water codes in the Western United States. And they allow for gray water use, but it has to be in subsurface irrigation. So you can't spray with gray water, which is the other thing. You can't use it above ground because it has pathogens in it, but you can use it in subsurface irrigation. So like tubing that's under the soil level. So it has to be 6 inches down, and you can water your lawn with gray water. Well, in the households that have participated in the gray water program in Phoenix, Arizona, there's an 18% increase in the number of standing colonies of E. coli and streptococci on lawns. Mm. So your kid is running across that, your dog, your cat, you, the potential impact to public health could be immense. So until we understand better how gray water will work in our alkaline soils, I oppose it. Now, for indoor use, that's a whole different story. So we're working with the state to reevaluate and interpret ordinances on indoor plumbing. So say for a commercial property, that they could use gray water. And by the way, gray water typically only comes from sinks and from showers. Some states don't allow washing machine water because potentially you have fecal material in your laundry. So basically just a sink and a shower is where you can get gray water from. So it's not like all the water you use in your home. But in an office building, for instance, they could collect water from sinks and use them in a closed loop system to flush toilets. Or water from a cooling tower. Cooling tower water can be recirculated a couple of times and then it has to be discharged. Well, can it be discharged into a toilet for flushing purposes? Because it's a closed loop system. And then that water that isn't ideal would go into a sewer system and then eventually make its way to the waste treatment, the reclamation facility, and be treated so that it's then made safe for discharge. So there's ways to look at gray water. Again, goes back to let's not look at things as an all or nothing. Gray water may not be appropriate for us to use out of doors, but there might be indoor applications that are perfectly safe and maybe more readily regulated and inspected so that we can maintain public health and environmental health. So that's kind of probably weren't expecting that whole answer for gray water. So yeah, the reason why Salt Lake County, and they mean, hopefully they don't remember I'm the one who pushed on that really hard. But yes, basically me.
So,
Yeah.
Stephanie, I wanted to use these last 10 minutes to just talk about education tips that we can use to help conserve water.
Is it only 10 minutes now? My gosh, time flies. Okay, so I've moved a few slides forward. One thing you could do is think about indoor water use. We think about conservation and even drought management as being outdoor, but we have to reduce our water use indoors. As a matter of fact, and I'm turning to look at my board, we currently by household. Now the gallons per capita number is really misunderstood, and I'm going to take 40 seconds to describe it. So when we talk about gallons per capita or CB, what is the initials? GPCD, which is gallons per capita per day, we don't actually mean that a person uses that much water. That's a misconception. And that's something that some organizations use to sort of misdirect and misinform people in dialogue. What that actually means is the volume of water that a water provider treats is divided by the total standing census approved population. And that's how you calculate gallons per capita. So what is not included in that is how much water is being used in businesses or industry or institutional uses. It's sort of assumed that that's the volume of water that is needed per person in that community to sustain that community, both in terms of public health and economy. So when we talk about, for instance, Salt Lake having a per capita, I think it's about 190 now, which isn't bad. It doesn't mean each person uses 190 gallons. It means the community uses 190 gallons per person. Okay. So one of the things we know is per household, we use about 147 gallons per day. We need that number down to 126. So we have the 7-gallon challenge. So we want every individual in a household to use 7 gallons less a day. And this is really easy. So on our website, we have all these really simple tips about what to do, like turning off the water when you're brushing your teeth or when you're shaving, or not running water to get it hot or cold. I don't care about the cute commercial with the cute old couple and, about running their dishwasher every night. That's dumb if it's not full. Yes, dishwashers are efficient, but if they're empty, they're less efficient than they would be if they're full. A full dishwasher doesn't use any more water than an empty dishwasher. So we're telling people to use their dishwasher when it's full, and that will help save water. So we've got the indoor thing going on. So we've got the 7-gallon challenge. In terms of our commercial customers, in July, I'm hoping sometime this next fiscal year, we'll be starting a commercial industrial audit program, which is actually right here. And what we'll be looking at doing is actually doing audits at a variety of commercial facilities and some public housing facilities to ascertain their volume of water, if it's inefficient, the age of their fixtures, and working with them to replace them. So there'll be actually matches in place. We're looking at doing like a 25% or 50% match. We're hoping to get some fixture manufacturers partnered with us on this. So we're not just looking at homeowners, we're also looking at commercial properties because they also need to reduce water use. The other thing we're looking at doing is we work a lot with Utah State University. We have the water check program, which we promote. It saves water, an average of 15 to 31% water use reduction at households that have a water check, which is a sprinkler irrigation sprinkler system audit. And when they reduce, and that water use saving stays. So if they have a water check this year, they'll use less water for the next 3 to 5 years on their landscape. So that's in the bank savings. We're working with Utah State University on a project called Water Maps. One of the complexities we have with residential water use is we know how much water, we have an estimate of how much water they use during the summer months versus the indoor, because we can subtract indoor winter use from summer use and assume that that gives us how much water they're using out of doors. But we don't know if that water is being used efficiently or not. Just because someone uses a lot of water doesn't mean it's inefficient. They may have a big place. Water Maps is actually an analysis of looking at properties on a parcel by parcel basis and doing a analysis of landscape water need based on some algorithms applied to about 6 different spatial, satellite, and aerial imagery layers so that we'll have a sense of how much water a landscape actually needs. And then we're comparing that to billing data. So we'll know how much. We created something called an LIR, which is a landscape irrigation ratio. And we're developing a website to tell the people, everybody, the story about this. But what it will do is tell us how much a property is over or under watering. So then we can do really targeted education and outreach. So rather than trying to get the message to everybody, because I don't have a budget for that and I don't have staff for that, if I know exactly which properties are watering 4 times as much as they do, I call them. I work with them to change their patterns, or we give them surcharges. I mean, this way we can really refine programming to a connection by connection basis, which is the goal. We also have rebates coming into play this next year. So starting mid-August, late August, we're going to do rebates for select spray nozzles for irrigation systems. There's a technology that's referred to as a multi-trajectory spray head, and it uses 15% less water than a standard pop-up spray head. And so we're rebating that. So, and it's an easy fix. You can screw off your spray heads and screw on the new one, and we'll have classes and videos and the whole bit. We're going to do rebates on a rain freeze sensor, which has a 3-day shutoff. So a lot of our rain sensors, if they don't measure a 1/4 of an inch, they don't change an irrigation schedule. This one, if it receives as little as 1/8 of an inch of rain, it will shut off an irrigation system for 3 full days. So we're going to rebate that. We're also going to be offering grass seed for sale. So we worked with Utah State University and an organization called the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance, which is a consortium of turf science researchers from land-grant universities across the United States and turf producers who've been working for the last 2 decades on identifying and developing lower water use grasses that also tolerate alkaline soils, need less fertilizer, and in some cases grow slower so they don't have to be mowed as often. And they've identified a blend specifically for us. So we've been working with them for the last year, and they have formulated a very specific blend for along our customers along the Wasatch Front. And we found a grower to provide that blend at cost, and we'll be selling that grass seed this summer. And we're actually, that's the meeting I was at, was the site that we're using at the utility facility is going to be the site where we're going to put the grass, plant the grass seed right now, so we can show people what it looks like. And so that grass seed will sell for about $8.50 for 5 pounds, which will do 1,000 square feet. And it will be made available to anyone within our service area. So those are just some of the things we do. We have a communications team now at the utility, and they're helping with some of our social media messaging. We're going to be working, finalizing an app with Utah State University so we can send out, push out messages to anyone who's had a water check to remind them to fix their system or to turn off their irrigation system. So we're trying to build some of that sort of direct messaging in play. Because we don't have a budget, unlike Jordan Valley and the big water districts that have taxing authority and a lot more dough than we do. We're pretty much every dime I have in terms of our budget goes to either research or program implementation. We don't have an advertising budget. We used to produce a calendar. I didn't produce it this last year because there was no way to get it out to schools because of COVID. And we may produce it this year and use it to inform every one of these other programs. But it's a pricey thing to do. And I don't know yet. Everyone likes getting a calendar, but I don't know if they actually use the information on the calendar, which is the dilemma. So that's we're doing the commercial audits, and we're also doing we've built a software program to help us analyze commercial water use, so that again, this isn't just about homeowners and lawns aren't the problem, by the way. It's our relationship to the lawn and the lawn we choose. If we chose smarter lawns, people could have grass. And actually, if they had all the grass, we know this from the water check program, people wouldn't even have to remove a stitch of grass if they just watered it appropriately and allowed for some brown spots. We could reduce our water use within our service area almost, in terms of outdoor watering, almost 40%. So, and that's without changing lawn. So on top of that, if we change our lawns and put in smarter irrigation systems and controllers, and you can get irrigation controller rebates because we're a partner city with Central Utah through them, and also toilet rebates. So those are some of the programs. And then we're looking to build a program for qualified, income qualified households in terms of indoor leak detection and fixture replacement. That one won't be a rebate. We'll actually do the full replacement because we don't want cost to be a barrier.
So Stephanie, there's a couple questions, but I need to go, so I can't stay on any longer. I don't know,
Stop
Nancy,
sharing my screen.
if you want to extend this meeting or, I think what we should do is just say there is a ton of information on your website.
Yes, there is. I'm just looking
Also, Helen mentioned on the league's website, there's also a ton of information, and I'll send out a follow-up email.
And anyone's welcome to email or call if they have more questions or want more information. I'm happy to share.
And I would like, Stephanie, is this something that you would be willing to share in a general meeting for the Salt Lake?
Absolutely.
I'm going to suggest that. I think it's a fantastic topic, and I feel like I'm fairly well informed about this, but I've never heard of cycle soaking. I think that needs to be on billboards everywhere.
Right.
I really do. I mean, there's so
actually USU sent out a postcard this spring, and it mentioned cycle soak, and we have there's videos on how to do it on Seawell's website, which is the education outreach arm of Utah State University's agricultural and landscape research program.
But and my feeling, sorry, Nancy, to interrupt, but if you're expecting the community to go to your websites to look up how to save water, it is kind of really ridiculous, because that's not going to happen.
Well, and
unless you're people like us, but you can see how many people are on our meeting.
Yeah. Well, that's why, I mean, the more we can help with like general meetings and postcards, I think it's a fantastic idea. So maybe
we're looking at my budget. I'm trying to figure out how to make the screen bigger, and I'm not being successful. I'm trying to get it out of smaller size. We're looking at doing postcards during the summer to let people know. They don't read bill inserts. We can put information on the bill, but only about 10%. Here we go. Only about 10% of the bill stuffers actually get read.
Yeah.
So it's not an effective tool. But we're looking at doing postcards. But yeah, anything you can do to help would be awesome, because it's really important.
Yeah.
When I started, I had much more direct access to the media. Rocky Anderson was the mayor, and he literally pushed me in front of cameras on a regular basis. Subsequent mayors are much more, let's say they have a more hierarchical and centralized approach to communication. And so I don't have that. We used to every week have articles in the local news stories and on TV about conservation and drought. And we don't have that access. And I don't know how to overcome that yet. Because I'm just one person, and I'm just the journalist geek.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it and learned so much. Thank you very much.
Nancy and I will do a follow-up email because there's a lot of information that I'm gonna need her help with, but we will also email you. I think there's a couple more questions that we will email you, Stephanie, that the group had, and then let's just see if we can't push this agenda.
Thank you. It would mean so much. I mean, that's not why I joined the league, because I also have, other concerns and interests. So I appreciate it, but I do, you guys, you ladies get around. So, and this is a big deal.
Yeah.
I actually wake up some nights thinking about this. Like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it's hugely a matter of it. It's much more positive coming from you. I don't feel as depressed, because if we're proactive, we can deal with this.
And I didn't even get to what's going on with golf and parks right now. Golf is an amazing partner. They're working really hard. And I think I'm finally getting headway with parks. So there's, again, approaching this strategy as, instead of freaking them out by saying you have to reduce by this much percent, is, hey, let's look at your sites, prioritize them, and begin the reductions there, sooner, smaller, so that we can incrementally, and maybe that will help us avoid bigger things. And so, and they seem to be really receptive to that.
Good.
So
Great.
headway.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
We
very
will
much.
follow up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.